another episode of Gossip Finance, where I am your host, Alacias and
And I'm Duncan Sandlin. How's it going, Lace?
Good. I'm really excited about today's episode. What are we talking about today?
Today we're going to talk about wage gap a little bit, but first we'll get into some news and fun stuff with that, and what's going on with the markets and Congress and all that jazz, and then we'll jump into the gender wage gap and whether or not it actually exists. All right, so fun stuff for the news. So market was down last year, everybody. So a lot of people were upset. They lost some money. However, I'll say this: the thing about it is, it's kind of an artificial sort of recession, if you could even call it a recession, because the bottom line is wages have actually been going up pretty steadily for the first time in a long time, which has its positives. The other thing about it is job growth has been pretty steady. It's cooled off a little bit, but it's still been going pretty well. And the economy's been actually doing pretty well for the most part, right? Not to say there aren't still problems, but it's been a lot better. So companies are making good profits. So you'd think the market would be going up, right? Sort of in a normal situation, it would be. But in this situation, what's happened is the Federal Reserve, because inflation has been really high, the Federal Reserve has raised rates. So just so you understand, the Federal Reserve has basically two goals. But it's basically the bank for the federal government. Okay, so it holds the money. Now it has two goals. One is it wants to keep unemployment as low as possible, or employment as high as possible, right? They want to maximize employment, and they want to keep inflation moderate, right? So they want to keep between that 2.5% to 3.5% kind of goal all the time. Inflation got up to 11 at one point. I think it's still at like 6 or 7 now. But to keep inflation down and help with that, they basically have what's called monetary policy. So they got three things they can do. They can either raise interest rates on banks, which means if I raise the interest rate by whatever it was, 0.5 percentage point, that means the rate that you can loan money from the Federal Reserve or the key banks, there's like 10 key banks that do that, big banks, they have to raise their rates by that, which means the rates as they go down are going to go up and up and up. So it raises rates all across the board for everything from car loans, home loans, everything, right? To all of us. So it makes it harder to get money for businesses. So it squeezes the money. If they lower interest rates, it means money is more available because you can get cheaper loans, right? And businesses, that's how businesses do a lot of their day-to-day business is they loan the money and then they repay it. So when you raise those rates, it squeezes down the amount of business, the amount of outflow, which can squeeze down inflation. Now, the other things they could do is they can buy back bonds and things like that, or sell bonds to lessen the amount of money in the economy. And I mean, those are a couple of the main things. They could also change the reserve requirements, how much money a bank has to have to back each loan. So, like if I loan Lacey $1,000, the Federal Reserve says you got to have 10% of that. So I have to have 10% to back the loan, right? So that's just how that goes. But I can loan out more money than I physically have. So that's kind of what's going on. So the Fed has been squeezing, right, what they call contractionary policy, trying to squeeze the amount of money in the system by raising interest rates. And that panics businesses because it means it's harder to get intraday loans to do business. So what they tend to do is sell off a lot of their stock to protect their cash preserves. And that's sort of what's going on here. I mean, there are a lot of other factors here, but that's a lot of what's happening. So it's one of those things where you think, oh, it's good news, the market should be up. Well, yeah, but it's good news with inflation, which means you're going to see more contractionary monetary policy, which spooks out corporations, which own a lot of the stock. So that's kind of what happened in the market. If you guys just the nuts and bolts of it, right? If you guys wanted to know. But yeah, that's sort of what's going on. The other thing that's funny about it too is a big portion of the inflation problem. I mean, a lot of it's been coming out of COVID and the supply chain slowdown and all that stuff. But one of the big things that stopped it is, or really knocked it up, was corporations realized, hey, inflation's going up, so we can artificially inflate our prices and make more money. So a lot of what that is on top of that is these companies started to just jack up prices so they can make more money. even though it wasn't really necessary to do so. But because they knew the demand was there, because everybody was getting out of COVID and shopping again, so they kind of created the problem that they're in and the market's in.
Right.
Yep.
So essentially, to boil this down to what the average person is seeing because of what's happening in the monetary policy, what are the things that the average just like consumer should be noticing as a result?
Well, well, one, I mean, as a consumer, you've noticed prices have gone up on a lot of
Mhm.
goods. You've also noticed if you have retirement accounts and stuff, those have not done well. Those have actually probably lost money this year, right? And part of that is because a there was a big inflationary push, but B, the companies, a lot of these corporations realized, hey, we can inflate the price even more and make more money. And so they did that. And the problem is once you do that, it's harder to walk back prices. Most companies don't want to lower prices because they have to do their reports to their shareholders. And so if they lower prices and they see a reduction in growth or anything, then it looks bad, right? And people tend to sell. So you're kind of stuck in this position where they inflated the prices to jack up their profits because they saw a temporary opening. But now they're in a bad position because, well, our stocks are tanking because we have to sell more and more in order to protect our cash position, right? And then what ends up happening is you see that happen, and you get sort of what's called herd instinct in the market, which is the average people see the market's going down, so they panic and they sell, and it kind of piles on itself. Even though, despite all this is happening, the economy is doing pretty well, which is kind of, but that's what's causing it. Is the economy is doing well. These guys have artificially raised inflation, so it's forced the Fed to try and raise interest rates to try and squeeze down the inflation. So it all kind of feeds into itself into a loop on how these things happen. I mean, you never know what's going to happen with the markets and stuff, but this is kind of what happened here in a nutshell. So it's one of those things where I think the smart thing right now is don't worry about your accounts. It'll come back. I mean, you know, it's not worth it because if you sell now, you're selling low and then you'd be buying back higher. So it's better just to sit on it. The only other thing to do is you just got to manage with the inflation as it is. I mean, there's not a ton you can do. But yeah, so that was that. Speaking of other messes in the system, uh, finally we got a Speaker of the House. That only took an extra week. I don't know if you heard about that news. So Kevin McCarthy is the Republican who was running for Speaker of the House. Couldn't get enough votes. It's the first time in a century they didn't win on the first round. He didn't win on the second round. Didn't win on the third round. Fourth round. Skipped through a week. Finally, I think it was the 15th ballot, the 15th time they went up for a vote. He finally got the vote and got into office. But there's a couple really funny things about this. I don't know if they're funny so much as interesting, which is one, Donald Trump endorsed it. Now, Donald Trump has been kind of having a rough year, other than the indictments and all that stuff, or potential indictments, and getting his business got sued and lost all that stuff. So he can't really do business in New York anymore. But all of his, before I jump into that, all of his candidates, for the most part, but a couple for the midterms, all lost. So that was really embarrassing, all the people he endorsed. Um, so then he endorses McCarthy here for Speaker, and it takes 15 rounds to get McCarthy elected because the holdouts, and some of them were Trump supporters, didn't want to vote for McCarthy for whatever reason. Now, here's an article. I just pulled this one off from MSNBC, but this is what Trump did. Oh, hang on. This is what he wrote. He posted this on his social media site. What's it called? Truth Social or Truth Central or whatever it is. So he wrote on it, some really good conversations took place last night, and it's now time for all the great Republican House members to vote for Kevin, all caps. Close the deal, take the victory, watch crazy Nancy Pelosi fly back home to a very broken California, the only speaker in U.S. history to have lost the House twice, Republicans, do not turn a great triumph into a giant embarrassing defeat. It's time to celebrate. You deserve it. Kevin McCarthy will do a good job, and maybe even a great job. Just watch. So, syntax is so good.
Oh my gosh, you just cannot make this up, can you?
No. So he's posts that, and then Kevin loses 14 rounds in a row. It was a big, so it was really humiliating for Trump because it shows that the Republicans don't really care anymore what he has to say. Because a lot of the people that were voting against McCarthy were people like Matt Gaetz and Marjorie Taylor Greene and Lauren Boebert, not Marjorie Taylor Greene, but Lauren Boebert, but people that are big Trump sycophants. And even they were telling him, no, you should tell Kevin to step down. They were saying that on the floor. So it was a big, nutsy kind of craziness, shit show kind of thing. Anyway, this is where it gets also kind of funny. So Kevin McCarthy, in order to get the holdouts, the remaining votes, had to give up a lot. And one of the things he gave up, we'll see if this sticks through, what happens, was they can now oust him at any time after any vote. So if there's a vote and they don't like the way it goes, they can vote to have him removed from speaker. So every time something comes up on the floor, every day, he could be on the chopping block. So what are the odds he's going to be speaker for that much longer? So he's basically given up he gave up all of his power just to get elected. It's the weirdest thing. He's not a bright guy.
That's super weird.
Yep. And just to help with your confidence in this, I've got a little clip of him right here. Let's see. So you can see this was him not too long ago walking back. So initially he was, when the January 6th, the Capitol riot, the election, he was one of those guys that when the election happened, did the election denial shit, right? Then when January 6th happened, he was the minority speaker, right, in the House. And he actually kind of condemned Trump and then afterwards walked that back and kissed his ass. So this is them asking him after the January 6th commission had pretty much wrapped up, if he still denies the election. And this is, he's not a bright guy, so listen to how he speaks.
Do you believe that Joe Biden was the legitimate victor of the 2020 election? And do you believe that Donald Trump was just flat wrong when he says the election was stolen?
Look, we've answered this question a long time. Joe Biden is the president. I think you can look that there's a lot of problems still with the election process. They just arrested a former Democratic congressman just was it yesterday in Pennsylvania, Philadelphia? And as we find a lot more information out there, we want to make sure more people have the ability to vote and that it's as secure with the election where we go.
But
yes,
ma'am. That was my question.
Yeah, your question. Your question was
to the White House. Was it legitimate? Was Donald Trump wrong when he says the election was stolen?
You know, Jonathan, we talked about this a long time. I've already answered that question.
Well,
Thank you.
What was the answer?
Thank you. We'll move on now. Thank you very much.
Publicly.
He's not. See what I said? Not a bright guy. Can't even dodge his way to that one. So, anyway, so that guy now who could also be ousted at any minute for any vote, because that was one of his big concessions. Plus, I think they're going to do I think you can see that they're going to do the Hunter Biden laptop stuff. I don't know if you guys know about this. Hunter Biden had a laptop, and Hunter Biden, used to have a problem with I think it was crack a while ago. It was an addict for a long time. That and hookers. And so there's a lot of photos, I guess, of him that they got from his laptop or something. But they're trying to connect it to Joe Biden, and none of it connected. It's mostly just a lot of nude photos of him with hookers. So there's going to be a whole committee to investigate that now for no reason.
I have to be honest with you. I don't want my tax dollars investigating somebody's
dick pics.
Yeah.
But that's what they're just going to try.
Each their own. I don't think it had anything to do with us or the American people. Maybe, a couple particular American people that he was involved with, but otherwise, I don't know that that's my business.
No, that and the other thing about it too is it's other than the who cares factor, right? Is the they don't really have any sort of agenda or bills that they're trying to pass. It's mostly just obstruction, and we're going to try and dig up dirt on the president's son. I mean, and I think,
Really no reason.
well, and I think that's going to go a lot worse than they think it is, because they forget. I mean, Hunter Biden, Joe Biden's son. Remember his mom and his sister died in a car accident when he was a little kid. Joe Biden was a senator at the time, so he predominantly spent a lot of time with his brother. His older brother was raised by Beau Biden. Beau was a decorated soldier in, I think, Iraq. And then Beau died not too long ago, 5 or 6 years ago. It was really tragic. He was still pretty young. And Hunter Biden's been dealing with problems with addiction and stuff, and he's been clean for the last several years that I'm aware of. Right? It's like, I mean, you can't get a more sympathetic character here. I mean, it's just been tragedy after tragedy in this guy's life. And okay, so he's an addict and he's had some problems with hookers. Okay. He's clean now. Is he a little nepotism kid that made all his money off his dad? Sure, but fucking all the others are too, so it's kind of hard to,
point the finger at this one in particular.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's pot kettle at that point, All right, so I just think it's funny, but it's like, yeah, that'll be interesting to see all that coming through. I don't think we're going to see the Republicans do much of anything over the next 2 years. It's just going to be dick pics and and investigative committees on nothing. So anyway, let's talk about the wage gap. So the gender wage gap, as it were. Now, the thing about it was, this was kind of a big issue when Obama was president. He tried to jump in on this, and like a lot of things that he had good intentions for, it kind of got screwed up right from the onset. So he approached this whole thing about, well, it's 70 cents on the dollar, right? Women make per men, right? And of course, what ends up happening is that's all anybody talks about is the number, right? And then it becomes this, well, it's really only 6 cents or 10 cents or whatever kind of crap. It's like, that's not the point. Even if it's 2 cents on the dollar, it's wrong. You shouldn't be getting paid a different amount for the same work, right? Because of your sex, right? Or your skin color or anything, right? But of course, that's how the conservatives had to spit. Oh, no, that's the number. Focus on the number, right? And that's how they got that whole kind of screwed up. But I want to start off this. This is John Oliver, and he did a whole bit on this, but I wanted to show this little bit here. He did a whole thing on the gender gap back in 2014. Just to give you an idea of how long this has been a problem. This goes way back before that even. But I'm just going to take a real quick clip from him, and hopefully HBO doesn't sue us.
Problem, but how to quantify it.
Right.
The Labor Department itself, the president's own Labor Department says it's 81 cents.
Another federal study, for example, says the disparity is more like 88 cents for every dollar.
The studies do show that when you do the controlling, there's about a 9% gap.
The wage gap is really somewhere between 5 and 7 cents.
Women who do not get married have virtually no wage gap. They earn 96 cents for every dollar a man makes.
Look, even if 96 cents is the number, which it isn't, it's still terrible. Let me put this in terms that are perhaps easy to understand. If someone takes a dump on my desk, the size of the dump is not the issue. I'm not going to say, well, how big of a dump is it? 8 inches? 10 inches? Oh, just 3 inches? Well, that's almost like you didn't take a dump on my desk at all.
I mean, he's not wrong.
It's a funny show. If you haven't seen it, that whole episode is really good too. But no, it's a funny show. But he's right. It's essentially the same. It's like somebody took a dump on your desk. We're not really caring about the actual penny per dollar, right? But that's what they have to make it into, because it's a red herring away from the issue. So if you haven't seen that episode, you should see that last week tonight episode. But But that's the thing that we need to talk about. So why is it that it happens? Okay. And a lot of it is, just sort of sexism in general. They've taken studies where they'll put Jennifer and John on the exact same resume. The only thing they'll change is the first name from Jennifer to John. And the guys, the ones that have John on them, are more likely to get offered more money up front if they select them. Then they're more likely to be selected. So there is a degree where women just get underpaid because businesses think they can get away with it, right? Now, the other thing about that is there's some of that. Some of the other big issue with the gender gap is, like they said, women tend to peak earlier, and I'm going to show you this just to kind of give you an example. So this is just how much American men earn at every age versus women too, right? So Bureau of Labor Statistics, second quarter. So this is median age groups. And then, so this is the first one, I think was, let's see. This is men. And then women are down here. So men, 16 to 19, 26,000. Women, same age, 21. Right? 2024, 28 to 31, 40 to 46. See, women make a lot less. But as you see here, women peak out right here, 35 to 44, 47. Men don't peak out until much later. Right?
Interesting.
Well, but what is the other thing that happens? Ageism, right? Which affects women more than men.
Yes, that's absolutely true.
Right. And there's kind of a stigma where it's like, oh yeah, you can still be a 55-year-old guy and still be good looking. Not so likely with women. Not such a thing, right?
Women start getting hit with the perception of being old at much younger ages than when those ideas get applied to men, for sure.
Right. So there's social stigma that gets applied to this with age in women versus age in men, right? Expectations. The other thing is there's also societal stigma, I would argue, where women start out, and this is just statistically true, that women are more likely to stay in a position longer than men, especially young men. And that's just a fact. Young men tend to bounce around. The other thing about that is the women, so you feel like as an employer, well, you can probably pay them less, they're still more likely to stay, right? As opposed to a young man, it feels like I have to pay him more to keep him because they're statistically more likely to leave, right? The other thing about that is you got to think about it from an employer perspective of healthcare, which is, and this is why I think that healthcare is kind of detestable in this country, is if we have a healthcare system where it's dependent on your employer to provide healthcare, right, then it's hard to leave your employer. And especially if you have family or kids. Because you can't have a 5-year-old and then not have healthcare for 3 months while you're switching jobs. Because if that kid gets sick or something, it's going to be devastating, right? Financially, it's going to cripple you. So a lot of times people stay in positions, and a lot of times women stay in positions just to keep their health care. So women tend to be kind of stuck in positions because they're tied to the health care and they can't leave. Even though they could probably go get a better job, or they want to go get a better job, they can't, right? So there's a negative to that too. Plus, you got to figure in, even as a woman, just to maintain your own personal health and sexual health, it's a lot more maintenance than it is for a man. You have to go see a gynecologist. A lot of times, women are the ones that are doing birth control, right? For guys, birth control mostly is just go get some condoms. For women, it's a fucking procedure. they got to go to a doctor and they got to go get prescription shit. And it's not just
Right.
yeah, it's not just I can just walk into 7-Eleven. Right.
Right. Multiple steps, multiple visits, which means multiple bills that get attached to insurance.
Right.
So insurance is obviously going to be paying more out for women, just trying to cover the same similar need, being birth control need or whatnot.
Yeah. Well, and it's the whole thing about they talked about emancipation of women, and part of that whole thing was if you give women control over their birth cycle, their reproductive cycle, then you allow them into the system and let them work, the floor rises, the economy gets better, everything gets better. And it worked every time in history, and every country's done it. But once again, if now that's dependent on the employer, it's kind of a way for the employer to wrangle some control and keep prices down and wage down. That would be I would counter argue that. I mean, you could probably argue against that. But for me, I mean, I could see that a lot. Where it's like for a young guy, if you're single and you don't have kids, it's like, oh, I don't need the healthcare for 3 months. You can sort of justify it, but it's harder if you're a young woman and it's like, well, fuck, I got to go see a gynecologist, or I have these, things going on or whatnot.
Mm-hmm.
Because we're a guy, you're kind of like, you get a physical maybe once every 2 years, if you think about it. So it's just one of those things. But I think that was a good example to show that just women just in general make less at every age group. And they tend to peak out about that age, about the time they get to their 40s, when they start tending to get looking older. You know what I'm saying? As where men don't peak out until their 50s. And actually their early 60s. Because I think it's less appearance based and more experience based for men. As with women, I think it's the reverse. So that would just be my argument on that. Did you have anything else you wanted to throw on that?
No, not in particular. I'm kind of curious what other people have to say about this. Do we?
So we have one more thing. So we haven't done this before. This will be a new thing. It's a PragerU video. This will be a little bit longer segment, but it'll be worth it. Trust me. Especially if you remember the dump on the desk analogy. That we don't care about the size of the dump, just that there's a dump on the desk. Right? So remember that. Keep that in mind. So this is PragerU. For those of you who don't know, PragerU is a guy, Dennis Prager. It's not actually a university. It's a YouTube channel. And what they do is they do conservative videos for teachers. They're trying to get it, conservative propaganda out as much as possible. So this stuff is all really, really backwards. They do fun stuff like, slavery is really black people's fault kind of stuff. yeah, no kidding. Yeah, when really white people were the hero because they ended slavery. Yeah.
Oh boy, here we go. Okay.
Their Confederate flag is good. Those kinds of guys. So this is on the wage gap, and they've got a philosopher, and she's an American Enterprise Institute. I forget her name, but it'll show her in a second. Anyway, she's going to argue there is no gender wage gap. Oh,
If for
there we
the
go.
same work women only make 77 cents for every dollar a man makes, why don't businesses hire only women? Wages are the biggest expense for most businesses, so hiring only women would reduce costs by nearly a quarter, and that would go right to the bottom line. Don't businesses want to be...
So, already, stupid argument number one. Women make less, so you should just hire all women because you can pay them less. Genius. How come businesses haven't thought of this? How come, Lace? How come?
I don't even know what to say. That is the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard.
Well, do you know why? Because they wouldn't be able to fill their employees. There aren't enough women. They're only about to have a little over half the population. They couldn't fill all those jobs.
All of the jobs that mathematically that doesn't even make any sense.
Plus, she's going to make an argument later that men tend to go into higher paying jobs, right? Well, if that's the case, then there aren't hardly any women to fill those jobs, are there? So so already she's going to contradict her argument. She will. She would
well,
all these things in a vacuum, I guess, make sense to her. But if you think about it, it doesn't. So the title of the video is "There is no gender wage gap," and her first argument is, "Well, there is. So why not just hire all women?"
so her first argument starts with the premise that there is one.
Right. So there is a dump on your desk, right?
Right?
Oh man, so that's it's just odd, but yeah, no, these are gonna be fun. I mean, this is all bad.
Profitable? Or are they really just bad at math? Well, actually, it's the feminists, celebrities, and politicians spreading this wage gap myth who have the math problem. Here's why. The 77 cents on the dollar statistic is calculated by dividing the median earnings of all women working full-time by the median earnings of all men working full-time. In other words, if the average income of all men is, say, $40,000 a year, and the average annual income of all women is, say, $30,800, that would mean that women earn 77 cents for every dollar a man earns. 30,800 divided by 40,000 equals 0.77. But these calculations don't reveal a gender wage injustice because they don't take into account occupation, position, education, or hours worked per week. Even a study by the American Association of University Women, a feminist organization, shows that the actual wage gap shrinks to only 6.6 cents when you factor in different choices men and women make.
See, there it is. It's choices. That's what it is.
So women don't make good enough choices,
right,
in order to make as
money.
much money as men.
Right, but I also want to get to this. So she's using the AAUW, right? Which is I think their third way to feminism, which we can get into some other time. But so it shrinks from this, to 23 cents to 6.6. Okay. Once again, back to you're arguing about the size of the dump on my desk.
Right. Instead of a 6-inch dump, it's a 1-inch dump.
Right. It's like there's still a turd on my desk. All right. I'm not going to leave it there just because it's 6 inches versus 1 inch, whatever, right? I'm going to sit there and say, let's get the turd off my desk and let's disinfect the desk. I'm not going to sit there and argue about how big it is. So that's, once again, it's the same argument, right? So even at 6.6 cents, if you factor in different choices and whatnot, well, if you look at that study, they're also talking about, but women are kind of forced into a lot of these situations.
Right. She just said choice of occupation being one of them, and, education, etc. But doesn't she realize how obviously cyclical that all is? If women are being sort of pushed into certain types of jobs and being, sort of having issues getting into other types of jobs, then naturally women are going to gravitate more toward the jobs that they feel they clearly can get.
Sure. Well, and the other thing,
as opposed to ones that are, that are more prohibitive for them, that they have a harder time getting into. Not to say some won't, but that's obviously sort of cyclical based on what has been presented that you can do.
Well, and we looked at it. I mean, it's the parts of it we talked was part of it just the sexual reproduction, children, right? Women, and there are studies that show that, and she'll probably get into this. I can't remember exactly what she gets into here, but the women that are under whatever 40 something that don't have children tend to make about the same, right, as men. Well, see, there you go, ladies. Just never have children and never be older than 40, and you're golden. Come on, get the fuck out of town. It's just so. Let's see what choices women make that are debilitating them. Educate us, doctor.
Is choice. The small wage gap that does exist has nothing to do with paying women less, let alone with sexism. It has to do with differences in individual career choices that men and women make. In 2009, the U.S. Department of Labor released a paper that examined more than 50 peer-reviewed studies and concluded that the oft-cited 23-cent wage gap may be almost entirely the result of individual choices being made by both male and female workers. Well, let's look at some of those choices. Georgetown University compiled a list of the 5 best-paying college majors and the percentage of men and women majoring in those fields. Number 1 best-paying major, petroleum engineering, 87% male. Number 2, pharmaceutical sciences, 48% male. 3, mathematics and computer science, 67% male. 4, aerospace engineering, 88% male. 5, chemical engineering, 72% male. Notice that women outrepresent men in only one of the 5 top-paying majors by only a few percentage points. Now consider the same study's list of the 5 worst-paying college majors. Number 1, counseling and psychology, 74% female. 2, early childhood education, 97% female. 3, theology and religious vocations, 66% male. 4, human services and community organization, 81% female. And 5, social work, 88% female. Here, it's the women who lead in all but one category. Even within the same profession, men and women make different career choices that impact.
Okay, so let's stick with that one first. So the question then becomes why? Are women more driven to those kinds of fields versus the others?
Well, there's a certain amount of socialization that I think definitely plays a role into it.
Mm-hmm.
As children, little boys are pushed towards certain things and little girls are pushed towards certain other things.
Sure.
So even from childhood, girls are taught to play nurturing games where you're, caring for individuals. You're supposed to be playing house and Barbies and things with mommies and taking care of things and teacher things and nursey things, right?
Right.
That's what little girls sort of get pushed toward doing. And not necessarily the same with little boys. And then you think about education, girls are pushed towards humanities and those, are the kinds of things that girls are supposed to excel at.
Right. The other thing is the big thing she skips over from the labor report is when they're talking about the 23 cents, they're just talking about, okay, this is basically just sort of the, like she said before, the overall kind of guesstimate, right? And what we're doing, we're taking median income of women divided by median income of men, right? And that's, we're getting about 77%, right? Now, they go on in the report to go, yeah, so that's part of that number is factored in partly by how, different choices people make, right? And women societally tend to be driven towards these sort of lower paying kind of jobs. Now, it might also be that because they've been predominantly women, they've been lower paying jobs, that they pay higher if they've been predominantly men. We don't know that for certain, but it's possible, right? The other thing that they point out is it doesn't matter either way. Same job, women tend to make less than men. So the 23 cents, once again, goes back to, there's a dump on my desk. We're arguing about the size of it. I don't care how big it is. I want it off my desk. Right? That's the problem here. Is that she's still back to let's argue about the size of the turd on your desk. Like, I don't care.
As long as it's only a 1-inch turd, I'm not going to complain. If it becomes larger than a 1-inch turd, then it's a problem.
Right. Yeah. No, the turd itself isn't the problem. But that's the point. No, so now she's going to sit there and she's going to say, okay, even in the same careers, women make different choices, and that's what hurts them. Now, this is also going to be sort of misrepresented, but we'll go through it for fun, for giggles.
Impact how much money they make. Take nursing, where male nurses, on the whole, earn 18% more than female nurses. The reason? Male nurses gravitate to the best paying nursing specialties, they work longer hours, and disproportionately find jobs in cities with the highest compensation.
Okay. So once again, male nurses make 18% more. So why is that? Okay, she's saying, okay, well, they tend to have more specialized positions, right? Well, what does that tell you? That tells you that they had to go to school longer, probably. Or they were able to get into those specialized positions. And does that mean that women aren't doing that? And why not? Right? Plus, they're willing to relocate. Well, I hate to tell you this, but typically for a man, it's easier to relocate. You know, you're a single woman, I'm sure you can do it too. But a lot of times women are in relationships. And the expectation is that if you move, the guy's not going to come with you. As where if you're a guy and you move, a lot of times the expectation she's going to come with you if you move for a job. Especially too if you're a woman and you're a nurse and you have kids, you can't just up and relocate. It's a lot harder,
Right.
So those are the kinds of things that I think we're missing here. Is there's also these expectations that are put on them where it's like, well, look, what if it's a situation where she can't relocate because the healthcare? Well, if she had universal healthcare, it wouldn't be a problem. Men are willing to work longer hours. Well, if we had better daycare or funding for daycare, they might be willing to
And
work longer hours.
let's be honest, in our society, it is still put upon women very largely to be sort of the head of the child care, child rearing department.
Mm-hmm.
It is expected, even if the woman works full time. People, they don't like to say that nowadays, but it's, I think, still very much the point of view is that people are looking at the female and saying, okay, but you're supposed to be the one in charge of all of these varying things with children. Mm-hmm. So even if she's working full time, she might not be trying to take a bunch of extra shifts or work longer shifts because it's still put upon her to be the primary source of child care, child rearing, running kids around, etc.
Right.
As opposed to socially, it's more acceptable for men to take less of that responsibility and opt to work more, and that means that they're good fathers because they're good breadwinners.
Right.
But you see, women, in order to be good mothers, don't need to be good breadwinners. No. They need to be Susie homemaker and soccer mom and classroom parent or whatnot.
Which is an interesting. Go ahead.
Those sort of expectations socially have to be taken into account.
Yeah. Well, which is an interesting dynamic too, because more women are college graduates now than men. And that's been the trend for the last 20 years. Colleges have a hard time getting men to go to school. And there are a lot of women that do. So you would think if we were even doing the median, that number would be drastically different because women would be making more money because they're higher educated just in general. But we don't see a huge change in that. And on top of the fact, the guy's willing to work longer hours or relocate. Well, he's more flexible. He has the ability to negotiate for more money, is what you've just described. Right? As where the woman isn't in that situation. Okay, well, why is it that she's not? Is it because of her living situation, or her kids, or whatnot? Because she has these extra expectations? Is it things like, okay, maybe they're more likely to give men more hours because they just assume men are willing to work them, right? And some of that.
Well, now, Duncan, we've talked about expectations on women of taking care of children too, but then when you start getting into those slightly older age categories for women, 40s and beyond, it might be the expectation to be taking care of children, but what about aging parents? Who does that generally fall upon in heterosexual couples more, the male or the female?
The female.
Let's be honest, females end up taking care of children and aging parents more frequently than men, which limits their availability and flexibility as well. They need more flexibility in their schedules. Therefore, they have to make more compromises with employers, which often can, relate directly to what their wages are.
All right. And my point is on top of yours, which is the assumption then is because women are taking care of kids or older parents or whatever, right? And that expectation is there. I'm more apt to go to my male employee and say, hey, will you work more hours than I am my female employee, because I've already got that assumption in my head. Even though the female employee might be totally willing to do it and want the money, it wouldn't occur to me right out of the gate.
So, I can add on to that from my perspective as being a female that does not have children and is not married. I have had employers automatically assume that I am available to work extra.
Right.
Because I do not have the status of being married or having children, as opposed to the females that do have children and are married, that they don't get approached for that as quickly. So I'm assuming probably for men, along, having the sort of social expectation that they're less in charge of those kinds of things, it becomes even more so that they become approached for those extra opportunities, extra hours, extra responsibilities, as opposed to women with children and spouses are frequently bypassed.
Right. Even if you are a guy and you're married with kids, you're more likely to be asked than your female employee, your female counterpart who's married with kids. You guys could be otherwise identical situations, but they're more apt to go to the guy first. The other thing about it is, and this is just true, is she skips right over, is even all things being equal, male nurses make more per hour, make more per year in salary than a female nurse is doing the same job. That's the bigger issue. So it always comes back to that initial joke, which is why I played it at the beginning, which is there's a dump on your desk. Why are we arguing about how big it is? Right.
I remember the job that I had before going into education, I found out, they say you're not supposed to talk about your wages. That's because they don't want to get caught red-handed.
That's right.
Basically. Well, we did talk about our wages, and I found out that there was a man that was doing the exact same job as me. He had been there less time, had zero experience going in. I came in with 5 years of experience, do the math there, and we did the exact same thing.
Right.
I actually had the higher level of education than he did, and guess who made more?
Him.
He did.
Yeah, that's how that works. All right, well, let's see what else she has. But man, I still love it. There's no gender wage gap, and she keeps telling us there's a gender wage gap. Nurses make 18% more if they're male.
Now here's how one expert on nursing compensation, Professor Linda Aiken of the University of Pennsylvania, sums up the data. Career choices and educational differences explain most, if not all, the gender gap in nursing. The Department of Labor paper concluded that once these differences are accounted for across all professions, the unexplained wage gap is somewhere between 4.8 and 7%, almost identical to the 6.6 percentage gap found by the AAUW. But why is there any gap at all? No one knows for sure, as both the AAUW and the Labor Department concede. There are so many variables that drive wages that no single study can cover them all. Few wage gap studies control for variables such as dangerous work environment. Men are vastly overrepresented, for example, on oil rigs. And here's another variable. Men are more willing and able to work long hours without advance notice. According to Harvard economist Claudia Golden, even if two lawyers have the same education, same specialty, and work the same number of hours, firms pay more to someone who is willing to always be on call and ready to be in the office when the firm needs them as opposed to wanting a more regular schedule. This isn't sexism. It's just common sense. With more realistic.
Well, but that's the problem. So this idea that, okay, there are a lot of variables. We can't account for what exactly is causing all of it, right? In every field, right? What we can say for fairly certain is the one thing we know that's consistent is there is a social issue where there's different expectations on men and women. That's social within society. Now, if you're a proponent of those, then that's fine. But the thing about it is that is what's driving the gap here. Okay? So now we know that there's a gap. Okay? We can argue about what exactly causes it up and down and sideways, but that's a lot of what it is it's social issues, right? Well, just because I don't know exactly what the causes of the problem doesn't mean we can't pass, I don't know, Equal Pay Act or something, or what was the Ledbetter Act, right? Right. So now, when Lacey, as you told earlier, finds out that the guy's making more money than her, she can go complain and sue the employer. So when they're talking about it, what she's not getting to, and she's never going to get to, they never will, which is what is the solution? The solution is that you should have as a woman, should have some sort of repercussion if you're not getting paid fairly. And that would be generally to go to court. And those would be decided individually. But if we are arguing about the number and saying, well, there really isn't one if you really argue this or that or the other thing, right?
Right.
Then what we're doing is we're pettifogging the issue. We're just gish galloping to try and get rid of the idea that let's even have the discussion about should Lacey have the right to go to court and say to her employer, no, you need to pay me what you're paying him. Right. And the thing about it is corporations don't really want that, because if Lacey does it, you better believe that fucking everybody else at that company is going to start doing it too. Now wait a minute.
Mm-hmm.
Right. But those were the things that were being pushed, right? The idea is that you should be able to have some legal repercussion if you're getting paid unfairly.
What's really interesting is there are certain career fields that have somewhat eliminated a bit of this. As a teacher, my pay is literally on a chart.
Yeah.
And I have to say, after the experience I had finding out that this man that had less experience and less education than me was making more, I greatly appreciated finding that my income was literally based on a combination of experience and education and was on a chart.
Yeah. Yeah. And I don't mind the companies negotiate for price and things like that. But my point is I still don't see a problem with, okay, we're doing the exact same job and I'm making 25% more. I don't have a problem with you going to the court and saying, hey, or going to the company and saying, hey, that's not cool.
Saying I'm worth more doesn't make you worth less.
Right. Because you can go to the company first and say, hey, that's not cool. Duncan's making the same, or Duncan's making more money for the same work. Right. And they might make an argument, well, but Duncan works more hours, or blah, 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 blah. And you can say, well, yeah, but I think it still needs to be reasonable here, or within, some gauge. Well, the company is more apt to want to deal with you if they also know you have the right to go to court and sue them.
Mm-hmm.
And then they're going to be publicly humiliated if you win in court because, so-and-so company pays women less. Right? And then what's going to happen? All their female employees are going to get together and go, wait a minute, are we getting paid less?
Right.
So I think that's a hell of an argument to be made. But I think it's really stupid to sit there and say, okay, well, there really isn't a pay gap because if you factor in all these things, it's still only this big. Yeah, but it's still a dump on my
It's
desk.
not a turd. It's not a turd if it's only an inch.
Right. It's
It stops being a turd entirely if
It's
it's only an inch.
it's a rabbit pellet.
Right. Yep.
All right, let's finish her up real quick.
To categories and definitions. Whatever wage gap remains would certainly narrow to the point of vanishing. So it seems that business leaders aren't bad at math simply because they don't only hire women. Those who claim that for the same work, women earn 77 cents on the dollar compared to men, on the other hand, are not merely bad at math, but at telling the truth. I'm Christina Hoff Summers of the American Enterprise Institute.
Okay. But that is true. I mean, if you take the median income, that's true. Right?
That
So
makes me crazy. She spent this entire video saying, well, the wage gap is this, but the wage gap is this, but when she was supposed to be saying there's not a wage gap. But she spent the entire video saying that there is one, but just excusing it.
right.
Like reason why it's acceptable that there's a turd on the desk.
Right. But essentially there wouldn't be a wage gap if women would just make the right decisions. Like not having children or turning 40 and working more hours. It's like, okay, you need to go get the right degree. Okay. I mean, okay. It doesn't really tell me much. I mean, so plus, it's one of those things where, yeah, you could sit there and go, okay, the 5 top paying professions are mostly men, but it's like, yeah, but women in general tend to have higher educations than men anymore in the United States. And yet they still don't make as much. Right? And you can say the same things like, we can look at this later too, like a black college graduate actually on average makes less than a white high school graduate in the United States. You're telling me there's nothing there that has to do with any sort of, I don't know, history in this country of how we treat black people? How about history in this country of how we treat women? It was almost impossible for a woman to get a bank loan. You couldn't get a car loan, a home loan, a business loan, anything like that until what, the 80s, the late 70s? Women couldn't get credit cards. A lot of women couldn't get checking accounts. You should read the book Dolores Claiborne by Stephen King, where she plots the murder of her husband. But the whole reason she plots it is, well, because the husband's sexually abusing her daughter. But the thing about it is she has a bank account where she's been working for years, saving money in this bank account, and didn't tell her husband about it. And what happened was he found out, went to the bank and withdrew all the money, even though the account was in her name. And they did it because he was a man. So they just let him access his wife's money. And she knows that had it been reversed, right? Had it been him and she come in and asked for his money at his account, they would have called him.
Absolutely.
But because she's a woman, she got screwed. But that's the thing is that happened. So this idea that, okay, why is it that women make less than men? Well, part of it is we really didn't let women in the workforce in any real sense until what, the 80s? And even then it was sexual harassment galore and all kinds of problems. And it still goes on. You have the Me Too movement and all that.
If you want to think back historically, really when women really started being allowed into the workforce, it was already predetermined into what types of positions.
Oh, yeah.
Women weren't just allowed to enter any field.
Mm-mm.
Women could be teachers, women could be nurses, women could be secretaries, things like that. Right, exactly. So the options that women were given were incredibly sexist already.
Mm-hmm.
Things that involved nurturing, didn't require automatically probably didn't require too much overtime. They automatically were created with the idea of what women's roles in society were. Those positions they were allowed to have matched the perception of what women's jobs and responsibility, and I don't mean jobs in terms of employment, I mean jobs within a household or a family unit,
right,
were supposed to be. So by creation, they were that way. So they, from the whole history of women working in our country, it's been set up for women to already be pigeonholed into specific things. So it can't be shocking to anybody that there would be a wage gap within it, because they didn't say, okay, women, you can enter the workforce. Here, be a doctor, be a lawyer, be an engineer. They said, no, be a teacher, be a caregiver,
be an administrative assistant,
secretary, working under the boss, not being the boss, answering the boss's phone calls and running his errands and making his coffee, right? Oh, making his coffee, just like you did for your husband at home. That's a good job for you,
yeah,
right? So obviously, there's a setup from the very beginning that sets women up to make less money.
Oh, but I've even seen shit like that in all the way into the 2000s, where like you're in a meeting and there's one woman there and she's presenting, and somebody will interrupt her in the middle of the presentation and go, "Oh, can you get me a cup of coffee?" And you're sitting there looking at like, what fucking decade are you from, man?
You're like, she's presenting. You literally want her to stop and get
Well, right. It's like she's the most senior fucking person in the room. Go get her coffee, dickhead. But half the guys are like shocked that she won't get it. The other half are like, "You just said that? What the fuck?" But it happens. It still happens. And the thing about it is I mean, that's just the way it was. I mean, I think about what was the Dewey Decimal System when the guy developed it, right? He developed it specifically because library jobs were female jobs and women were stupid, so he wanted to make it as easy as possible. That's why he developed it that way. It's a great system, but still, that was why he did it. That was his whole thinking. Women can't think very well, so we got to make it easy on them. I mean, so to sit there and say, okay, well, if women would make different choices, well, the problem is women are stuck in these situations. I don't know that how much these choices are like conscious choices versus this is just sort of what they're pushed towards.
Right. Is it the choice that women are trying to make or the choice they're given? Right. Are you being given all of the choices and that's the choice you're making?
Right.
Or have you been very clearly set up to get to have a limited number of choices, therefore you choose between the ones that are presented to you?
Right.
How many women as children were presented engineering as one of their choices?
Right. Well, then let's...
Arguably now you could go into engineering, but how many little girls had engineering stuck in front of them as one of them?
Right. Well, and then, we haven't even got into, well, how does this affect Black, Hispanic, Native American women?
Right.
So, this is all still the kind of a white woman problem, the way she's presenting it. Right. You start factoring in minority women and, oh my God, that wage gap shit goes through the roof.
Mm-hmm.
So I mean, it's just all stupid stuff, but that was our fun little bit with PragerU. It was long, I know, but I thought it was worth it. And thank you to Dr. Susan, what's her name? Susan Hoff, Christina Hoff Summers or something. Yeah. She wrote a book. She's kind of an anti-feminist. She wrote a book about, what was it called? The War Against Boys. About how feminism was destroying young men or something. It was, but yeah, it's the same crap. I looked at her book. It's the same. It's all anecdotal. Shit. She doesn't really have any good argument. It's just anecdotal. Let me just pull one thing out that kind of sort of represents what I think, and ignore everything else. So.
Right.
But yeah, so good stuff. Good show. Where can everybody catch you, Lace?
All right. So for information about courses, blog articles and workshops, you can find me at mysensewithsense.com. If you want information about courses, or if you want to write into us because you have questions for us, if you have a topic request, or alternately, if you found some fun video you would like us to see, you can write in to us. Where, Duncan?
At gossipfinancead@outlook.com. It'll be down below. Yeah, also, I mean, if you call in, or if you're somebody who wants to like complain or call in, we can probably arrange to have somebody come in for 10 or 15 minutes and argue with us if you want. So yeah, feel free to email us on that too. We'd be willing to do it. Otherwise, thanks for joining us, everybody. We'll catch you next time.